Video games are bad for you, and you should never play video games. Kids should never play video games. It's unhealthy. John, argue with me.
Except I can tell you don't believe that for a second.
uh, I believe it with a lot of nuance and context added. if I think this actually relates to something we were talking about in the Discord yesterday. When it comes to video games and what is good, what is bad, it depends how you're actually using them. The conversation in Discord yesterday was about phone bans in school, because that's the video that went out a week back. For those listening, that's the Discord server, open chats every 2 Fridays or every other Friday. But we were talking about how you use the phone matters as to whether it should be banned or not, and whether it's problematic or not. And I think it's the same for gaming. If you're gaming all of the time, like the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, then yes, it's an issue. It's problematic because life is more than just gaming. But if gaming is your job, well, now it's a different conversation. And if gaming is your way of socializing, now it's a different conversation. So when I say people, a lot of the time, older people say gaming is bad for you, I'm like, yeah, but how? Why? That's what I start thinking
Yeah.
about. What about you?
Yeah, it's been an interesting relationship with gaming and my kids and myself, as I think I've alluded to before, because my kids like to game. Aiden will be in Minecraft all day, every day, basically all the time if he could. And it's been interesting to kind of experience it from a parent side after being the kid. And like my mum was fairly strict with gaming. It was like you get half an hour or an hour and that's it. Like you get an hour a day and that's it. And you're not allowed any more than that. Um, and that's only if you've done everything else and you've been a good, you've behaved yourself, etc., etc.
Yeah,
But
see,
with the kids, yeah, go on.
I was very different. My parents are very old fashioned, so I didn't actually get access to any sort of like gaming console for a long time. And when I did get access to the gaming console, I could do what I wanted with it. But I think that's because I was doing so much sport anyway. So my day was okay, you go to school, do the school thing, but after school, there was like every single day, Monday through Sunday, every single day there was some sort of sport for at least an hour, if not 3, 4 hours in some cases, because of longer training sessions or multiple sports on a day. I'd go athletics first for an hour, then I'd travel to football, or I'd do football, then I'd go trampoline, or maybe I'd do trampoline for 4 hours. Like I was always engaged in sport. So when I got
Mm.
home, I had dinner. After dinner, it was do what you want. So I
Mm.
played on Xbox for however many hours, which is why I think my gaming time was basically from like 9 till 3 in the morning, because the rest of the day was full.
9 till 3 in the morning.
Yeah, yeah,
I've never done that.
yeah. That was oh no, that was a regular from when I started playing on the Xbox 360, going back a few consoles here.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, when I started playing on the Xbox 360 or the 360, it was like my entire evening. That's all it was. I was a big Call of Duty gamer. I say was.
I don't strike you for a card game. I'm not gonna lie. And again, it's strategic, so maybe it is. I don't know. I just didn't see you as a cod. Minecraft, however, yes.
See, I enjoy watching Minecraft, and I
Mm,
don't mind playing it sometimes,
I am exactly the same.
but it's so dull.
Yes. Yeah. My kids can spend hours and bless them. They're like, can you come play? Can you come play? I'm like, I can. I won't be on for very long because I get very like the idea of building these ginormous like things, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds really cool. I'd rather watch it though, because I don't want to be spending my entire time building.
Hmm.
It's like that would just get so dull so quickly. I am a shot caller, strategic. I like playing strategy games, 4X, all of that stuff. That's kind of my gaming thing. Obviously, I'm currently playing Baldur's Gate 3, talking about the 3 a.m. sleep, maybe. Which was fun. So much so that I literally was like, okay, cool. I'm not playing tonight because I know I'm up early tomorrow for this. So I'm not playing because if I did, I would not sleep because it's such a good game and I get so engrossed. I love my strategic games that I can get lost in the world because it's just good fun.
This is where I think it's interesting looking at the games and looking at education in schools and how you could potentially compare them. I was listening to it's not really a lecture or webinar. I guess you call it a podcast from Anna Fabriga. I think you say is her last name. She's the one that's written the Learning Game, which is either out now or pre-order thing. I don't know. She seems to be on like everywhere online at the moment that I'm looking, but I look in educational science. So,
That
but
would
she,
make sense.
yeah, but she was talking about how gamification is pointification, and I agree. However, she's saying that we can learn a lot from games, which I like, but she's saying that games are focused on points and gaining points and how extrinsic motivation is bad. And I've seen this quite a lot in conversations around extrinsic motivation, and it's always put on the negative side. Like extrinsic motivation is bad, it's negative, it's not long lasting, etc., etc. But this is where I start to distrust some of the advice that they give, because I look at it and go, okay, you're saying intrinsic versus extrinsic. Why? Why is there a
Yeah,
good and a bad motivator when you look at intrinsic, extrinsic? Because when when I look at the extrinsic motivators for her book, it's getting readers. So why is she pushing the book? Well, she wants more readers. That's an extrinsic motivator, and it's also a vanity metric. But it's helping her push the book. It's a motivator. That's not negative. If she was purely focused on, well, now that's different. So when I think about games and it being pointification, is it a bad thing? No. So what makes the pointification, the gamification of something bad? Well, when your behaviors go in that direction, but can your behaviors go in that direction being negative from intrinsic motivation? Yes. I mean, look
yeah.
at the look at the conspiracy theorists. They are intrinsically motivated to disprove something, and it drives them to conspiracy theories that a lot of people would question. Is that healthy? I'm not so sure. But it's an example of where intrinsic motivation has, I don't want to say it's negative, but it can lead to ineffective behaviors.
Mm. Yeah. The intrinsic versus extrinsic conversation is a weird one because we're all extrinsic. We're all extrinsic. That one. We're always motivated by something on the outside. Like that is just a thing.
Extrinsically.
Extrinsically, thank you. Teeth in. Like that. It's not like we can suddenly stop doing that.
Yep.
Like that's part of how we function. Like
This
that.
this relates to one of the video essays that I saw from Zoe B a while back. I think it's the first video essay I watched from her, where it's about grades in school and failing. And the general notion of grades being negative, standardized testing being negative, and the negative impacts, I understand the arguments. However, when I watched the video, she talks about extrinsic motivation for a good chunk of the video, like almost a third of the video, and talking about rewards as extrinsic motivation. But when we look at the motivation of intrinsic motivation, is mastery orientation intrinsic or extrinsic? Most people would say intrinsic. You're like, oh, I'm mastering the skill. I'm getting better because I want to get better. But why do you want to get better?
Yeah.
Do you want to get better so that you can not beat others? Or do you want to get better so you can beat others? If you want to get better because you want to beat others, be better than others, then that's extrinsic motivation. It's a multi-causal motivator, I guess you'd say. I mean, this comes back to the ecological approach. There's no single cause. There's no linear causality. There's multiple causes. It's non-linear causality, and I would argue that intrinsic motivators and extrinsic motivators have different weights, different intensities on potential causal
Different
links of behaviors.
factors.
Yes, you could say that, but I'd probably say that's a different conversation. But there's different weights. I think the dog's just come in the room. Yeah, the dog's just come in the room to say hi. But there's different weights on those motivators. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It means that they are all contributing. So when I think about tests and grades as being bad extrinsic motivators, if we take the standardized grades from it, what is it? It's an assessment. So are we saying assessments are bad external motivators? Well, if they are, why do we give qualifications? Why do we have credentials? That's a bad extrinsic motivator. So why are teachers needing to do a professional qualification to become a teacher? Because that's a bad extrinsic motivator to become a teacher. The argument doesn't stand. It doesn't hold up when you apply it outside of a school setting. So I'm like, why are we even talking about extrinsic motivators here? That's not the problem. Or for me, I don't see that as the problem. Yes, it's a potential symptom, and it's certainly correlated to negative behaviors. But I wouldn't say it's the problem. I'd say it's the behaviors and the cultural actions that we have inside of the spaces that we're speaking in that's the issue, i.e., teachers changing the way that they teach because of the grades. Students changing the way they try to learn because of the grades. So how do we change those behaviors? We change the intensity of those motivators and potentially shift them elsewhere. And this is where it's not a bad v good. There's dynamics involved.
So it's been interesting kind of talking about the school thing. So my son is going into standard education, which we have been fighting to get him into a specialist setting. But government, there we go. But it's interesting as I am familiarizing myself or becoming attuned to the school and their systems and all of the things that they're doing. I'm like, hang on, he might actually enjoy that. That's not something he would get from that school. That's not something he could get from the other school. And so it's interesting, like, my perception has shifted of like, okay, yes, this is going to suck, but also there are so many opportunities that he just won't get in the other school. And that's quite interesting. And I'm hesitantly hopeful, hesitantly hopeful, like, because I did survive in
Mainstream
higher
school.
education. Yeah, I survived in mainstream school, just about, but I did.
What I'm interested to see is the relationship between you as the parent and him going through mainstream school, because I feel a lot of students that struggle going through mainstream school don't have the same sort of educated support system that others do. When you look at students that succeed, their parents are teachers typically, or their parents, whether they know it or not, have done things at home that's helped the individual become an autonomous individual. My parents, I know they didn't know the science. They didn't know like why it worked. They didn't know how it worked, but they gave me the freedom to explore what I wanted. They used to call me a sponge for learning. If I had a question, they'd be like, "We don't know the answer. Go figure it out." So I'd go try and find it out, and I would always explore those avenues.
This one is something that I've just started doing with Aiden. Of like, he asked me a question, I don't know, go find out. And he's
Go
like,
tell
oh,
me, like find out and tell
yeah,
me.
find out and tell me. Yeah. And it's really interesting because his relationship with his tablet has changed.
Really?
Yeah, because he's now gone, oh, I can go find it out on the web, and he gets excited that he can go and search it and find it. And it's been like that. It was just a sudden switch for him, and his tablet's gone from just entertainment to looking stuff up, like starting to explore and learn. And I'm like, yes, yes. And it's really exciting to see because he has that same like excitement and extrinsic and intrinsic motivation to do that. He's like, I want to know this, I want to know that, I want to know this, I want to know that, I want to know this, I want to know that. And it's interesting coming from, as a parent, I've shifted away from being like, oh, just go do this and then find this and then you can find this. It's like, I don't know, go find out. And just letting him go find out. Well, how do I do that? Go on your browser, search, and then he
Yeah.
does it, and then he struggles, and then he stops, and then he comes back again, and he goes again, but he keeps coming back to it. It's quite nice to see him having that, like fostering that within himself now, because
Mm.
I think that's going to help. Because he'll have access to a library which he's going to love.
That's the thing with education is it's not just in school. And
Yeah.
when people say, oh, we need critical think, we need to teach critical thinking at school, we need to teach arguments at school, we need to teach all these different skills. Those skills can't be taught in school alone. It's not like you go to a critical thinking lesson and suddenly develop the skill. I mean, there's adults that still can't do it. So so it's not something that you can do a lesson on, and it's not something you just learn.
Mm.
You need to engage in activities that require critical thinking, which I would argue is easier done at home because, as we know, it's easier to learn when there's less, like the ratio is lower. One teacher teaching 25, 30 kids is less effective as one teacher teaching one kid. And where is the relationship or the ratio lower from educator to learner? At home with parents. No, a parent is not going to be able to teach the kid like maths and science and chemistry if that's not their area of expertise. But if the parent can help the individual help themselves, then they can learn how to do it themselves. And when they go into school, they then get those advantages from the school setting, which is where I see, I guess, coming back into the gaming, which is where I see the whole gamification of education, gamification of learning can be beneficial if it's not directed at winning the game. And this is
Mm.
where like the extrinsic motivators come in. What Anna was talking about when it comes to gamification is the pointification is the problem, the focus on the points. But if the focus of the points is, okay, I'm going to learn all of these things so I can go to school and make my friends look silly, or I can go to school and do a really good presentation, like whatever the motivator is, they're doing the research at home and then going into school with all this knowledge, however you want to define that, that they gained. So, sorry, I don't care if it's extrinsic or intrinsic motivation. If the behaviors are helping them develop self directed learning skills, and they're using that in a project-based setting where it's applied, it's actually being used in the real world rather than it being, hey, can you answer these questions that are on the board because they're the next ones in the textbook? Like, if they're doing useful behaviors, effective behaviors that we know is worth it in learning, I don't care if it's pointification, gamification, intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, if it's self-directed or whether it's teacher-directed. If the individual is learning behaviors that they can do themselves, then I would say it's beneficial. And this is where education versus prevention is a really important conversation for me, which relates to like the phone ban that we were talking about in Discord yesterday, but also in games. Do you stop kids from playing games, or do you educate kids on what's effective or healthy use of games?
Mm. And it's interesting as I just sit and think about that, because obviously for my kids, it's like, oh, don't, they shouldn't game too much. They shouldn't be always gaming, is what the learned behavior is. But it's just sitting there and going, well, why? First of all, like, is there what is actually my limit? What would I see as no, that's actually ineffective. And it's
some
interesting how much more gaming there is when I go, what is ineffective? What is effective? And it's interesting since putting healthy and unhealthy in my pop and changing it to ineffective and effective. Not that's the wrong way around, but it's fine. You know what I
yeah.
meant. But since doing that, it has changed and just brought to my attention like that's not healthy. No, it's ineffective. Okay, cool. What's effective? And that is almost a slightly, I don't know. It's less full of shit attached to it. It's so much more.
I think it's because when you say ineffective or effective, that that has to imply that there are contexts and nuances involved, because that can be effective in that situation, but not that one. When we think about using the word healthy, it's even though you can still have healthy in that context, healthy in this context, because of I think the baggage added with the word health,
Yeah,
it's much more of a you are healthy or you're not. There's more of a binary attached to the term.
yeah,
Obviously, this comes down to the meaning that each individual puts on the word and the term. But for me, effective when it comes to learning is much more useful than healthy, because healthy is so subjective, whereas effective is a bit more grounded. Uh, when it comes to the gaming conversation, what is gaming and what isn't gaming is another one of those binary questions that I would attach to these sorts of conversations, just to challenge those that say gaming is good, gaming is bad, gaming more than this amount of hours is good or bad. What is gaming? Is it playing a video game on a certain console? Does it have to be a console? If it does, what about PCs? If PCs are included in the gaming, then what sort of PC games are we talking about? Are we talking about shooter games, strategy games? If we include strategy games in there, are we talking about websites like Brilliant? Because they are games. Is that bad gaming? It's a website built towards
and now a
learning.
message from our sponsor. Oh wait,
But that's what I mean. When people say, "Oh, gaming's bad," I'm like, what sort of gaming? And I don't think many people will have an answer. Most will stereotypically go towards first person shooters. They're bad. Well, why are they bad? Oh, because kids shouldn't be doing X, Y, Z, and it's going to cause them to do this, that, and the other. Right? What if they're talking to their friends during that time? And what if, while they're playing Call of Duty, this is something I used to do quite a lot when I was playing, what if they were talking about lessons that had happened at school, or football matches that were happening after school, or they were talking about homework that they needed to get done while they're playing the game? I used to do that all the time. We used to moan about teachers, talk about stuff that was going on in school, talk about social events that's happening inside the year group. And then when I was with like football or trampoline or cricket or any of those sports, like it it was talking about what had happened during the day whilst playing the game. The game just happened to be the medium that we were using. Is that bad?
no,
I don't think so. I personally don't think so.
no, it's not. And that's the thing. As I've been kind of for me, I game, but I realized that my relationship with gaming has been spun negatively. Like, oh, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't play because I need to work or I need to do this or do that or do this or do that. So it's interesting, like how I'm going, okay, why should I? Why shouldn't I? Is it just a social thing? Well, yeah, it is a social thing.
That is where I start thinking about what Ali said a couple years back with his TV use. He said he only watches TV with other people because it's a social thing. And to me, I understand where he's coming from. Obviously, he was in his really productive stage at this point where he's like, productivity, I'm going to watch everything at like times 5 speed. So I can't understand really what's going on. But yeah, I remember him saying he was watching TV at like times 3. I was like, why? Uh, but when it comes to the productivity of actions and behaviors we need to look at why you're doing it. What's the purpose of doing it? If you're watching TV to enjoy yourself and relax and recover, well, now you don't want to be watching it at times two speed. And now you probably do want to be watching it by yourself. Like, I watch TV every day at lunchtime. I eat my lunch and I watch TV. Why do I watch TV? Multiple reasons. One of them is to help my understanding of how films are made, how documentaries are told. Another one is the editing of the Netflix movies and films, because I'm interested in that sort of thing. The third thing is normally the topic of the thing that I'm watching. Like, I was watching Hannibal as a series recently. There's psychology involved, there's philosophy involved. Films and movies talk about real world events, normally extended a little bit further for dramatic effect, but the core concept's still there. So watching TV is actually research for me. And
Yeah.
people say you shouldn't watch TV. I'm like, yeah, but when you watch something like Inception, yeah, the graphics are cool. Yeah, the film's really cool. But you think
Mm.
about the concept behind Inception. Well, now you're talking about a lot of different philosophers.
Yeah.
And if you try and apply some of that into your own world, your own thinking, well, now you're doing pop work whilst watching a film.
Yeah.
Gaming's the same.
Yeah.
You're a Churchill nod bobblehead.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah, and that's something that as I've been kind of playing with my pop, um, it's been very much like, oh, this behavior makes sense now. Oh, that's why I do this. Oh, that's why I do that. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, why am I punishing myself for this when there is a reason behind it? There is a reason. Oh, I have kind of pushed myself too far and I need more of that. Okay, cool, fine, fair enough. And it's just understand, like, having that going from the really thin, like, wobble board to just slowly extending that out is like, that is really interesting. And it
How would you
take
describe that feeling?
freeing, stabilizing, exciting, because I'm uncovering things that I already do that I didn't realize I was doing.
That's the same experience I had when I recognized what the ecological approach was giving to me. Again, I'm
That, I
speaking
mean,
like,
we just bring that in as well. Then we're just like, oh,
well, that's what the
everybody.
pop is, though. The pop is the ecological approach, because you're looking at affordances and constraints of the environment that you're in, the relationship that you're in, but you're doing it through the medium of text.
Yeah,
Because you're attuning your focus to the affordances in the environment, the affordances typically in a pop being lexicons, competencies and skills.
tell you what,
And
the lexicon is so damn good. Like, I'm just in my lexicon at the moment. I haven't developed anything else, but I've just been looking at the lexicon. I'm like, okay, cool, 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 cool. And I found myself researching sports shit after our conversation, and I'm like,
what?
yeah, well, I did my definition of training. And if you look at it may have changed by now, but in my pop, I have highlighted certain lexicon terms, certain terms, because I'm like, that sounds right, but I want to look into this more. I want to research a little bit more. Because I think that was the task you set me, was to go and write what you think it means and then go and research so that I have something as a baseline to go from. And it was interesting. The first one I did was training. I'm like, okay, cool. Mm, yeah, that sounds, and I think I have it.
I'm not sure where your pop's located. I've just tried to type in pop and it's not called pop. And I was like, philosophy of practice. And then I got all my files. I'm like, I don't know what your files are called, John,
It is
because
called
I never go
philosophy of
there.
practice. It
It
is
is.
called philosophy of practice.
Okay. Or practice. I don't see a philosophy of practice inside of a John folder. I'm going to have to
I don't
actually
know
go through.
why.
Well, yeah, I'm going to have to actually go through and find it. Where do you reckon it would be? Inside of projects?
Projects. Yeah,
Oh, yes,
it's
I
right
found
up
it.
top.
Yeah, I found it now.
I had real trouble trying to find my philosophy of practice and your philosophy of practice too at first.
Mine, I have an alias for pop, so I type in pop and it's the first thing that comes up.
No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But would that not so if I had a pop alias, would that mean it would overwrite your alias? That's interesting.
No, they'd both be at the top. They both go to the top because they've got different paths. So mine will be Danny Canvas, philosophy at practice Canvas, and then yours would be John, then whatever folder, philosophy at practice.
Whatever folder, something or other, who the fuck cares?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we've got the episode, your episode where you spoke about pop, and it's called John Pop, and that's what I clicked on. I was like, John Pop. Oh no, that's in the podcast folder. No, that's not John's Pop, even though it is about John's Pop.
Yeah, because prac training was the first one I had, and I'm like, don't like that one. It felt like it was words.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, cool. I need to go look that up. And I started looking it up, and I was like, okay, cool. Oh, that's fair. It's really fascinating. Because I think there was a sport acronym for training, which you're probably just like, oh God,
Which
yeah.
one?
Oh, there's multiple, are there? Okay, cool, good. More research is needed then.
When you as soon as you dive into the sports literature, you'll probably, if you do go in, you'll probably recognize that the majority of the frameworks and the things that are spoken about in sport are taken and then used in business, used in self-help, but they're not referenced appropriately back to sport. Or people reference them back to sport, but it's like, oh yeah, some tennis thing, or oh yeah, some basketball, volleyball, whatever sport thing. And you're like, yeah, but that was one study of this massive body of literature that you're missing because you
Mm.
just wanted confirmation bias of something that you thought and found a study that supports it. So yeah, I guess moving backwards a second when it comes to the lexicon, using the lexicon as a research tool, as a way to understand the meanings behind things, I would equate this to the ecological approach in affordances, because everyone, it's information. Everyone sees those information. It sees those words. We all see those words, but meanings are in people, not words. So how we attune our focus to those words can develop our skills. And if we're developing our skills by using the words, now we're developing our behaviors that can relate to those skills, which immediately impacts how we behave in the world, because we're changing our behaviors in, hopefully, alignment to the meanings that we have behind the words that we're using, which is the constraints-led approach. We're constraining our view to attune the affordances that we're perceiving in the environment to impact our behavior in developing expertise and skills. That's literally the ecological approach in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Which is why I've always done like the pop thing. I haven't written it out before, but I've always done the pop thing. So having it written out now is really nice to see and to tangibly work with.
Mm.
And moving backwards sort of 10 minutes or so, for me, I would say stability is what it gave me.
Mm.
Before I recognized this, I was very unstable. I was unstable in the way that I was thinking, the way that I was acting. My behaviors were all over the place. I didn't really know where to go, what to do. You may call it clarity, mental clarity. I wouldn't say I have mental clarity now. I would say I'm stable in the way that I think,
Mm.
because there's still loads of blurry questions in the way that I think, but I'm stable.
Mm.
And that stability's got to be built from something. And for me, it's the philosophy of practice I've built through the ecological approach. And when I ask, okay, how do children learn about this? How do they understand this? I realize, hold up, the ecological approach is natural learning. We already have it. We already see it because that's the way we perceive in the world. We directly perceive. So we don't need to teach children, or anyone for that matter, how to do the ecological approach, because they're already doing it. They're already perceiving directly. If we assume the ecological approach, they're already perceiving information. They're already perceiving affordances and attuning their skills. So what do we actually need to do?
Is it an attunement to what they're actually doing?
But as a parent, as a teacher, what can we do to help the already self-directed learner become aware of the skills that they should ideally be developing on their own. I mean, you're already doing it. How do you do that? You constrain the environment. Constraints-led approach to coaching, which is a philosophy of teaching, but that could be the games approach. It could be Vygotsky's, I think is how you say it. It could be his approach. It could be Rosenshine's, but it doesn't really matter what philosophical approach you take to teaching. If you're constraining the environment and giving the individual enough autonomy to learn themselves, well, then they're going to develop these sorts of things anyway. I would imagine most people that you speak to have meanings of words. Whether they challenge those meanings of words is another question. So how do we then foster those sorts of behaviors? How do we foster those sorts of challenges? Well,
I'm just thinking back to conversations I've had with my son as he's talking about this. So what do you think that means? Okay, cool. Why? So one of them is one of the things that come up quite a lot is consequences.
what with your
Because
son?
consequences are bad. And I'm like, why? Why are they bad? Oh, because I get told off. Okay, cool. So the consequence of you having a snack is you're not hungry. Is that not right? He went, huh. Yeah. Okay, is that bad? No. Oh, interesting. What do you think? Are consequences bad? I don't know. Good. That's fine.
And that directly relates to the rewards. A reward's good. Sometimes no.
No.
Think about drugs. You get rewarded when you take drugs, but I would certainly not say drugs can be good all the time. There are certainly negatives. I mean, I'm watching Painkiller at the moment on Netflix, which is it's a limited series. It's kind of like a documentary series about the opioid outbreak.
I think I started watching that, but never finished it.
Yeah, I'm watching that at the moment, and like the drugs, they reward you for taking the drug, obviously, because it reduces your pain, it gives you the high. But I mean, look at all the other consequences that you get from the reward. They are related, directly related in this case.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I mean, this again, it comes back to non-linear causality. Everything relates to something else in some way, and it's as Julia and Jeff write in their book, it's easier to say what doesn't cause something than what does.
Yeah.
What caused you to be here today, John? Well, I woke up at the right time. Nothing interfered with me. So everything that potentially could have happened to interfere with your night's sleep, all of those things were potential causes. And then you could go on and on and on with potential causes, and you could argue that they all are causes, but they're all very small causes, because at the end of the day you had to make the decision. Well, is making a decision one cause? No, because the decision is made multiple points through time, because you're making multiple behaviors. Each time you move towards the chair, there's multiple decisions there. Am I really going to do this? Yes, I'm going to. Am I really? Yes, am I going to say yes? So it's far easier to say.
But don't forget cognitive overwhelm.
Oh, shut up.
Our brains cannot cope with all of that. We have a limited space and store.
Obviously, I've had a bit of an impact on my sister because she's in the house and she hears what I talk about in research. So
obviously, I've had an impact on my sister. She's in the house.
Yes. Well, she's in the environment I work in, so she speaks with me a fair bit. And I don't speak with her about the in-depths, the depths of the research, because she's not interested. She's a zoologist. But I ask her questions every once in a while, and I asked her about cognitive load. And she was like, what's that? And I said, well, you know, when people say like they've only got so much brain space, she was like, oh, that's rubbish. So, what do you mean that's rubbish? She was like, well, obviously I don't have that much brain space. I can just eat something and then I'm ready to go again. I'm like, yeah, no, but now you've taken a break. She's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that like my brain space is gonna recover. And I was like, okay, you got a point. You got a point. I mean, I agree with her, but I'm trying to argue for cognitive load theory at this point. That oh, okay, but don't you feel like overwhelmed sometimes? You feel like mentally foggy. She's like, well, yeah, but that's normally because I don't understand the thing. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, surely that means your cognitive load's too high. She's like, well, no, because if I just learn something else, then I can do it. So how does my cognitive load get bigger and smaller? Like that doesn't make sense. It's like I'm arguing against myself here, and she doesn't know anything about this theory either. Like, she's just intuitively going, well, that doesn't make sense because that's not how I experience the world.
No, and that's the thing. It's interesting because obviously with my family, it's interesting starting to ask those questions because it's like as I'm thinking, Aiden is struggling to learn how to tie his shoelaces right now, and like he just gets overwhelmed, which is the word that's used all of the time. And I'm just like, okay, so he doesn't understand. There's some lack of understanding. Okay, so what's there? And so I'm just there thinking through all of these things, like, okay, cool. And it's just interesting. Once you see you are attuned to that to the ecological approach,
It's
it's
literally
very
like taking a red pill.
yeah.
For me, it's literally like taking a red pill because when I heard you talking about the shoelaces, I sit here and think, okay, so he has a level of skill. Everyone has a level of skill, but at the moment, it's not high enough for a certain outcome, i.e., the shoe not to fall off and the lace not to fall apart, right? So, how do you then help that person learn it? Well, you constrain the environment. So, and obviously, practice. Practice has to be involved. So, how does someone practice tying shoelaces? Well, do they have to be on a shoe? Do you have to tie knots on a shoe? If you don't, what can you tie knots on? Well, if you're tying a bow, let's just use a bow for example, because it's probably the most common knot used. How many different ways can you tie a bow? Because there's more than one. Which way suits that person more than the other? Because some people tie their shoelaces with double loops. Some people tie their shoelaces going all the way through all the crossovers. Some people use, depending on depending on the rope, you can actually loop it back on itself. But this is where my knot theory gets really nerdy because as a scout and all that sort of stuff, it's great fun. But there are like three, maybe arguably four different ways to tie a traditional loop. But most people do it the same way. They go right, right over left and under, and then you make a loop, and you make another loop, you cross them over and you tie. Or you make one loop, then you cross over through and then you tie. Like it's there's so many different ways to do it. And if the person is being told this is one way to learn the loop, maybe they just don't understand that because they haven't been exposed to those sorts of affordances yet. And their level of understanding in that skill is low, that the information essentially is too complex. If you're trying to focus on, okay, I've tied that knot, then I've done that loop, now I need to do this loop. If that information is already too complex for that person to understand, then maybe that method isn't appropriate at that point in time. It's the same as saying, I'm not going to teach this person that's very new to trampoline, like you've just got a trampoline before. Let's teach you a double back somersault. That makes no sense. Let's teach you how to jump straight first. And it's the same with tying shoelaces. Okay, let's not teach you how to tie the shoelace in one motion because you have to hold different things in different places. Let's teach you just how to do a thumb knot, which is the right over left under pull, or left over right under pull, same difference. Typical thumb knot. But yeah, so it's like teach that bit. Can they do that bit consistently? And then you got practice. Do you block practice it? Do you vary practice it? Because you can random practice knot tying because you can have different knots in there. I mean, I know I'm going a bit over the top here with knots, but it's the same principle. Like to develop a skill, there's got to be various exposure inside of practice.
And now I just want to know all about nerdy knot stuff now. I'm just like, carry on. I'm now absolutely fascinated by nerdy knots. I didn't realize this, but there must be different ways to tie shoelaces.
Not theory obviously goes back to maths as well, because you have crossovers and that's how DNA entangles itself, etc. But when I was in Scouts, there are loads of different ways of doing different knots, and there are different knots for different purposes. So when you're trying to connect two different pieces of rope, for example, if they're the same width, you'd use a reef knot, so right over left under, left over right under. Whereas if they are different widths, you'd use a sheep shank. Or if you want to make a rope shorter, you can use a sheath, which is it reduces it by a third. So you make like an S shape. You twist one end, you put one end of the top overlaps through the loop, and then you do it on the other side. And then when you pull the rope is shorter, but you don't have to cut the rope. And you'd use that for when you're, I don't know, bivouacking or doing whatever. But it's another knot that you can use to change the affordances of the object. So I'm making the rope shorter by adding a knot to it, or I'm making the rope stronger by adding loops to it. So you may have seen sort of like I guess it kind of looks like a plait. It's a plait rope, but it makes it really, really short, but it makes it really heavy as well. And that's how you can store rope. And there's one knot that I use all the time. Do I have a bit of string by me? No. You can get a bit of string, loop it over once, cross it, and then as you push it through, you can essentially create a loop, and then you push the rope through, create another loop, and it goes all the way through. Then when you tie it off at the end, you put the end of the rope through, and it gets really, really short. So you can make I made I think it was like a 10-foot bit of rope, like pick up a ball, like you could just like have it in your hands. As soon as you untie the end of it, so you pull out the last bit of rope, you can have one person hold one end, the other person hold the other end, and they can just run, and all the knot will unfold. Because it's a way of storing rope. And I used to do this as a scout all the time, but I guess the point still stands. The understanding those sorts of things comes with exposure to the skill, but also understanding of how the knots work. I'm visualizing all of these knots when I'm speaking about them because I know what they look like. I'd imagine everyone else listening is like, "What the fuck's he talking about? He's off his tree." But yeah, and just as a story with that knot, as an explorer scout, so I was 17. When you're in the woods and you're feeling around as a scout, we used to talk all the time. That's what I loved about scouts. We would talk in the woods, do whatever. And I remember we had this 10-foot bit of rope. Well, actually, I think it was longer than there was another example where it was longer. And I was just knotting it up. It took me like 2 hours to make this long bit of rope. I can't remember how long it was. I knotted it up, and then I knotted it up again. So it was sort of this how long is that? Probably like a meter long. And what I did is I put it on the floor by the tent. And one of the beavers, so one of the younger, must have been like 7, 8, pointed at it and said, "What's that?" I said, "It's a bit of rope." And they said, "Yeah, but why does it look like that?" I was like, "Because I've knotted it." "Well, isn't it going to take really long to unknot it?" I said, "No." So all the leaders at this point, the leaders are adults, all the leaders at this point were like, "Danny, don't do it," because I knew what I was going to say. And I said, "If you hold that end and run that way with the rope, you'll see that it comes undone." And the beaver obviously didn't believe me. So I held one end of the rope, they held the other end of the rope, and they ran for, so we're on this massive open field. They ran from our campsite all the way down to the end of our row of tents, and it wasn't even like a quarter of the way done. So another beaver held at the corner, like where the rope was, and then the other one just carried on running. And they went all the way around the field because it was a field rope for the floor. So we had like 7 different beavers dotted around this campsite, pulling on the rope to get all the knots. And I mean, it was a great fun activity. But it's just them exploring this knot and this rope, and it became like a team building activity, and actually turned into a game later on in the week. But they hadn't seen it, they hadn't explored this knot before, they didn't know what it was. and it was a fun way to engage them with knots. I know this is a very odd story when we're meant to be talking about gamification, but yeah, exposure to skills. And I think gaming is an
I was just
example.
about to do that. I was like, yeah, gaming's exposure to skill. And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
No,
Is
you
that
talk now.
bad?
I've just spoken about like loads of stuff. You
I
speak.
am just so fascinated. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that would work. I'm just thinking of all the ways. Anyway, yeah. And I think that right there, I think sums up the whole thing with gaming of like its exposure to skills that you may not be exposed to. And it's in like, as I think about what I do now and how I do what I do, not all of it, but much of it can be attributed to gaming and what I play and what I enjoy doing. I enjoy the role playing element of games. I enjoy the strategic element of figuring out, okay, cool. So this is a thing. I'm going to be attacked by barbarians in like a matter of minutes. What is the most efficient way of dealing with the barbarians? I'm talking about Civ. Um, dealing with the barbarians. I could put a wall up, but that's going to take X turns. Okay, so but that would then stand for longer. And then you've got all of these things that I'm like figuring out as I go. And even yesterday, I was playing. I can't remember what it's called, but it's this ship game that I just got from Humble Bundle, literally. And it is around you have fuel and a limited supply, and you have to recharge the fuel at certain stations on certain islands. And the first time I did it, it was atrocious, and I died.
Yeah.
I ran out of money. And then the second time I was like, okay, cool. I need to be more deliberate on the direction I go, and spend a bit more time to check this, to check that, and be like, oh, okay, cool. All right, cool. And then as I attuned to the environment of that map, I realized, okay, cool. Here is a dead zone where there isn't anywhere that I can actually do anything with. And I will run out of fuel if I'm here. So I need to make sure that I have batteries in my thing. And it's that, like, yeah.
Something I'm now intrigued to look at, I might have to have a look at the research on this, is how those kids that game differ from those kids that don't when it comes to problem solving and creative problem solving. Because I would imagine those that game need to problem solve within the constraints of the game rules. Like in Call of Duty, because that's the game that I played by far the most. Yes, it's just run around, shoot people, but there's strategy involved. When you go round a corner, do you lay down on the floor? Well, it depends on the game. Some games help that because of game mechanics, other games don't. Moving forwards to the more modern Call of Duties, there's sliding and jumping and who knows what else, because I haven't played in a while, in a few years actually. But there are so many game mechanics that people manipulate to try and do certain things. And they learn, okay, I want to lean around this corner because I can lean in this game. Or actually, I'm going to jump around this corner because it's easier. And when you're playing objective-based games like Domination or Hardpoint, for those unfamiliar, it's like Capture the Flag is another one. It's probably the easiest one to explain for those that don't play. But you need to go to the other end, get their flag, and get back. Well, how do you do that as a team? That's problem solving. You need to look at the map. Where is everyone else? Where can I run to? And that is something that kids are doing in the game. They're problem solving in the game. So my question then inside of education would be, if kids are problem solving inside of games, outside of school, why can't we give them more difficult problems inside of school for them to solve rather than these isolated tasks or tests that we're giving them for a subject? That would be my question. And I don't know whether that's I think because of the way schools are in England anyway, that would be a teacher specific thing in most schools. But the limitation there is, are they learning what they need to learn to pass the test? That's a no. because of representative practice design, which is my argument against standardized tests. My argument is not that I don't think it's the traditional one where standardized tests decreases mental health, anxiety is increased, and like those are the traditional arguments, and other ones being that the standardized tests don't measure what they're meant to be measuring. I don't disagree with those arguments. However, my biggest argument against standardized tests is that it's the training for passing the test is representative. So if you're going to teach someone to do something effectively, it needs to be representative. And if you're testing someone in a standardized test, then the training needs to mimic that. Otherwise, they're going to fail the test. So if the tests are the way the world works, great, we're teaching kids for the way the world works. But we know that tests are not how the world works. So we need to change it. So teachers can't do anything about it, really, if they're going to teach kids to pass the test. But you don't want to teach kids to pass the test. But if they don't pass the test, then they don't move forwards. So I wouldn't say the tests are the problem, because we can have tests. Standardized tests, fine, have them. They are pretty good at measuring ability. But they're not good at measuring someone's ability to do things in the real world.
No.
And that's where the conflict is.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice place to close out there.
Yeah.
So, thanks for listening.